Hello, hello. It's okay? All right. Sorry about the technical difficulties. Let me just recap really quickly what I went over. My name again is Stephanie, and this is another session of Stitching with Stephanie. I work with Wonderfill, and of course, I'm always around thread all the time, but where what I really love is handwork and hand embroidery, all things that have to do with it, including the threads I use, the tools I use, the patterns I work with, and also like the different fabrics we like to work on as well. So, today our focus will be on the Hand Embroidery Essentials Kit. So, if you haven't seen it already, we made this limited edition kit right here, and it's just kind of a really nice way to dip your toes in and try a few of our favorite products that we use for hand embroidery. So be doing a little bit of an unboxing, but the pattern itself is a really lovely flower bouquet. And this is like a sneak peek of one that's about half done, and I'll be showing you how to do every stitch that's actually on this bouquet right here. But the idea is you get to try a little bit of everything. We have everything that you need in this box. So you can take this wherever you need to go. And without further ado, let's get into some unboxing. Oops, oops. All right. So this is just our regular little box of pearls. I'm just gonna open it up here. Okay. First, we have this. This is called a thread butler. The reason why we included it in this box is, as you can see here, there's little holes for you to actually attach some thread to. And on the back side, you can write down the color numbers of each thread and the project that it's for. This is just a like a nice little tool to carry with you when you're traveling with your threads or if you're on the go with the threads, because although this is still small and easy to carry around, this is even more portable. You just put all your threads in here, maybe put it in a plastic bag, and everything will stay together, and you just take this little guy with you. So this is kind of like a little bonus feature if you need to really be on the go with it, but otherwise this box is also very great for taking it around. Next, I'll kind of go into the threads that we have here. So these are right here. All of these balls are eleganza. So this is number 8 weight eleganza. Many of you might be familiar with using it. We have the most colors available in 8 weight, but it is also available in 5 weight and 3 weight. The lower the number, the thicker the thread. So this is a really common weight thread that we like to use. It's not too heavy, not too light, but it gives a lot of dimension because it's a pearl cotton, nice and round to give you texture and some roundness in your embroidery. So you get 4 balls of pearl cotton eleganza, and one of them is variegated in this lavendery purple color, which is one of my favorites. So you get these 4 here. Next, um, uh, so I opened all these threads already while I was doing my demo stitching, but you'll also actually be getting 2 of these spools of rayon thread. Now, the difference between the brown one and the green one is actually one is razzle and one is dazzle. What that means is there's actually one strand of metallic going through the dazzle. And as you can see, there's a little bit of like a tape, I guess you can say, on here. And that's just to keep everything contained. And I'll take this off so I can better show you the thread. So Razzle is one of my favorite looking threads. See, has like a really high sheen, high luster. So when you're doing any stitching with it, it'll really pop out at you, and it's not gonna be as subtle as like using a cotton that might be more similar to your fabric texture. This will be a nice thing to highlight certain areas of your embroidery. And what I've put on this is called a Wonder Guard. So as you can see here, it's not actually sticky itself, but it sticks to itself. So since rayon is a more slippery thread, it can unwind a little bit easier off the spool. And just to keep everything organized and easy to use, we just put some Wonder Guard in here so you can wrap it around your spool. So you just hold it like this. It doesn't have to be too tight. You can just wrap it around your spool like this, and then you can just pull the thread off when you need it. So this is Razzle. The green one we have here, like I mentioned earlier, has a strand of metallic that goes through it, and this is Dazzle. So Dazzle is also really lovely because on top of the high sheen of the rayon, you're actually also getting metallic in there. So this really adds like a sparkle and a highlight into your projects. So yeah, Dazzle is absolutely gorgeous to work with in your projects. And again, since it's a rayon, can tend to be a little bit slippery, a little bit messy to use because it just wants to kind of fly off the spool here a little. So just to tame it, we put on the Wonder Guard. As simple as that. And you can just pull off again however much you want off the spool. So there we go. And I have an unopened Wonder Guard just to show you how you can use it. In your kit, you'll get two, one for each Razzle and Dazzle, but this is what it'll look like. Essentially, you just have to peel off the tape like so from the backing, a little bit like a sticker, but like I said, it itself is not sticky. So this is just how we give it to you, and then you can just apply it to the thread. All right. Next up are the tools that you'll actually probably be using the most to do this, which is the needles and needle threaders. So let me just pour everything out here. First, we have, we're going to be including two Wonderfill needle threaders right here. There you go. You kind of see it right there. These are just some simple needle threaders. They're a bit more reinforced so they don't break as easily. And so I find this really useful for threading, especially like Razzle and Dazzle, which can be, again, a little bit more slippery, but also, always helpful to keep on hand if you're ever having some issues threading your needle. Then we also have a milliner's needle right here. The reason why we have a milliner's is because there are stitches like the bullion knot, which would be more convenient to have a milliner's, even a French knot as well. The reason for that is because if I take out one needle right here, and I'll just put it on my hand. Hopefully you guys can see this. The shaft of the needle is actually the same diameter from the tip virtually to the end of the needle. So that means any stitches that require wrapping and then for you to pull the needle through, it's just going to be easier to do that. It's going to be a little less stressful on your hand. That's why you have your milliner's needles there. And then we also have some really nice Bowen needles right here. And these are chenille 22s. So for both needles, we sized up a little bit just to accommodate the variety of thread that we have here. But of course, if you feel a little bit more comfortable using maybe one size down, like a chenille 24, if you have that at home, or if you have like a slightly smaller milliner's, you can use that as well. But for what we've provided in the kit, this is going to be all like very user friendly. And so for the chenille needles, as you can see here, the eye is actually quite large, but what that does is it widens the needle near the eye. So that's why when you're doing those French knots or bullion knots, this would be a lot more challenging to use like a chenille needle for versus a milliner's. But of course, you can use this for your lazy daisies, your back stitch, your stem stitch, pretty much everything else, your woven circle. You can always use this guy right here. So that's what comes in your kit. There's quite a lot of stuff in here, which is really fun. So we'll just keep it all contained. Oh, actually, there is one more piece that I forgot to mention, and that is actually your flower bouquet. So you don't have to do any tracing or, you don't have to do any tracing or drawing or stenciling. What also comes in your kit is a cutout from our rinse away design sheet, and it'll look like this. And so I've peeled it off and stuck it to some fabric already, but let me just put this on here so you can see in focus. So you can kind of see from the little shadow down here, but this is essentially like it kind of is a little sticker, and it's very thin, so you can stitch right through it. And when you open the kit, we've pre-printed on it already as well. So it'll have exactly where you need a stitch, and there are some color suggestions for you as well, but you don't need to follow that. You can use whichever colors you want. It's flowers, right? So it can be whatever you want. Um, this is what the oops, there you go. This is what the flower bouquet was printed on. It's the rinse away design sheet. And so these come in 8.5 by 11. So you can print on them, you can draw on them, and you can just stitch really easily and rinse it away. And my favorite part of this is actually the fact that um, it doesn't make your needle sticky, it doesn't gum anything up, and it also washes away super easy. Another really convenient aspect of it is it has a grid on the back here, as you can see. So if there's anything you need to measure or cut out, you can just follow the grid in the back. It's also thin enough that actually, even if you don't have a light box at home, you can just take out one sheet and put it over whatever you're tracing, and likely you'll be able to see right through it. So all I've done is peeled it off and stuck it to here. This is the general size of it. I think my hoop is about 6 inches. So I originally wanted to put this on a pair of jeans or a tote bag to show you guys, but for the ease of filming, I just cut out a piece of kind of like stitching cloth. It's the texture is similar to canvas, but I would definitely put this on like clothing or decorative things. I'm currently, well, not currently, but my plan is to make a set of tea mats, and I want to put a variation of this flower bouquet on them. So I've just cut out, a piece of fabric here. I might turn this into a little baggie for later, but you can put this anywhere that you want to. We just need to put a little bit of water on top of this after it's done, and then it's totally usable, which is really nice. And even if any of you have attended any of our past few shows, like Pour l'Amour du Fil, which is in France, Paducah, AQS Paducah, Quilt Week, Quilt Canada. At the show, we've actually been doing make and takes on this flower bouquet. And it's a little variation of it. So again, you can always add to it if you want to. As you can see, there's like a French knot at the end of every branch here, but on this side, I've just like filled the area with more French knots just because I like the look of it. And a question that we get asked pretty frequently too is whether or not the ink will wash off, or whether or not the ink will stain the fabric. And it absolutely won't. The ink is printed directly onto the rinse away design sheet, and then when you peel it off and stick it to your fabric, at no point is the ink actually in contact with your fabric. So once it washes off, it all comes off all nice and clean. So I have just a few more examples that I want to show you guys. This one has a little bit of lint on there, so excuse me. But when you first peel it, it'll look like this. You see your stencil and all the lines that you might want to trace in any color that you want. Then you can start stitching straight on it right away like this. And again, you can choose any color that you want to. I just went with some more basic colors here, like some purples, whites, yellows. And I absolutely love using variegated colors, especially when you're doing things like French knots, where it's very um, easy to show like a blend of colors. Right here, it kind of looks like the flowers are blooming at different times, which is my favorite. And then once you finish filling out the whole bouquet, then you can actually just run it under some tap water. It doesn't need to be soaked for a couple hours or anything like that. You can literally just put it under your tap for maybe like a minute and just gently Like, you can gently, rub it with your finger in some more dense spots, like where like a pile of French knots might be, just to make sure everything's cleared out, and then you'll be left with a pretty little bouquet like this. So again, like I have a lot of variegated threads through this. All of this is eleganza, but in your kit, you guys will have the rayon thread to play with as well. So back to the flower bouquet that's in your kit. As you can see, it's a little bit different than the ones we showed you, but there's some new stitches in here that aren't included in the original, like this fishbone stitch that we're going to do with Dazzle. And then we also have the woven circle, which is also not included in the other bouquet. So it's, again, a really nice way to learn some new stitches, and these are not hard at all. Anyone can learn them. It's very beginner friendly. So if you've never tried handwork before, I strongly encourage you to give it a try. So now we're going to dive a little bit into how to do certain stitches. And I'm going to start off by teaching you guys how to do the lazy daisy. So that's where you see these kind of long loopy shapes, where the orange is here and also right here. Anytime you kind of see this loop, this is a lazy daisy. So colors, again, are just suggestions. You can roll with whichever color you want, but for the sake of just keeping it consistent to what's on the pattern here, I'm going to go with the orange again and do this last flower as well. So I have my number 230 eleganza. People always also ask me how much thread to take. I typically will take an amount between the length to my elbow to the length to my shoulder, nothing longer than that, because then you're just pulling a lot of thread and you'll have a higher likelihood of getting knots. And another thing to keep in mind is when you sew on a sewing machine, you're using the exact amount of thread that's going to be stitched into your fabric. But with handwork, the whole length of thread is running up and down through every stitch. So by the time you're on your last bit of thread, it's actually gone through a lot more like friction and abrasion than your thread that's further away from the needle. I don't know if that makes sense, but so for example, I have my thread right here. The thread that will be used for the first half of this bit, it's going to be the newest, nicest thread. It's going to stay in there. But by the time I get to the end of my thread, this would have already gone up and down through fabric several times. And so that's why you don't want a super long thread, because you might encounter maybe a looser twist, or it might look a little bit fuzzier than your beginning thread. And I know it's just always kind of a bother to have to like rethread and start over, start in a new spot, but it is something that will help your end result a lot. So I have my needle threaded. I do put a little tiny knot at the end of my thread, just especially when the design is a little bit sparse. I don't have a lot of places to bury the thread, so I typically just also enjoy putting a knot at the end. So I'm just going to start off right here, pull the needle up. And I'm right-handed, and what I like to do with my lazy daisies is I'll hold it with my left hand like so, and especially when I'm doing it on a hoop. So there's ways to do it off the hoop and ways to do it on the hoop. And I'll kind of show you both to the best of my ability, but on the hoop, you're gonna be doing a lot more like stabbing motions, and what I mean is just straight up and down to create one stitch. But if you're doing it off the hoop, you can kind of go in and come out in one fell swoop. So first we come up, and you're actually gonna go down right next to where you came up, right there. We're gonna pull this through, and at the tip of this petal, we're gonna come back up and make sure that this loop is caught by the needle right here. if you can see. We want to make sure that's inside. Then we just pull this through. And with lazy daisies, you don't want to pull it too tight because you want some roundness at the end of the petal. If you pull it really tight, it'll just look like a straight line. And all you do after that is you tack it down like that. There's your first lazy daisy. And now I'm going to show you what I typically do if I'm not using a hoop, or if the fabric I'm using is thick enough that I, don't need to use a hoop. Or it's like a fabric that won't crinkle easily, like wool, for example. I'll usually go in next to where I came up, like this. And I'm just gonna try because it's hooped right now, so it might be a little bit challenging. But like so. So this is one stitch where I went under and I came up at the tip of the petal. And if you're doing it this way, all you have to do is take your working thread here and swing it behind your needle there. So you can see it's behind the needle. So this is always going to be a little bit more challenging on the hoop. But again, that's my preferred method if I'm not on the hoop, which is most of the time. All right, and then you just pull it again, not too tight. And then you just tack it down behind the top of the loop there. And I'm just going to go around here to show you a few times how I do it. And I'll mostly be using the stabbing motion just to show you guys, I think, a little bit more clearly on camera. There's also no order that you need to do this in. Sometimes I start with the center like this, and sometimes I'll start with the lazy daisies like how I am right now. And there's lots of things you can do with the lazy daisy. So this is kind of it in its simplest form, but you can always make them closer together, further apart. You can put one lazy daisy inside another lazy daisy, and that creates a really unique and pretty look as well. You can make them like longer, shorter, wider. A lot of it is based off of like your tension, like how tight you pull the petal. And something that I would consider doing after, I see when I'm done most of the project is I could also actually add petals between the existing petals here, maybe in a different color, and that would look really nice too. And now we're just on our last petal right here. And I think I'd have just enough thread, which is very satisfying because sometimes when you just have that one little thing left and you got to thread a whole new piece, that can be quite annoying. There we go. I have the needle through the loop. Just pull it through like this, not too tight. Tack it down like so. And there we go. We got our next little daisy clump. So I'm just going to take it off my stand really quick and this is the back of my work. What I typically like to do here is I'll just run my needle under like a stitch. If it's very dense, I'll just do it through a few. But if it's not like this, I'll run it under a previous stitch and then I'll run it under the loop that I made, and that creates like a little tiny knot. Just like pulling that a little bit. And then that way I can trim pretty close to where I ended to make things nice and neat. Okay, so that's how you do the Lazy Daisy. Pretty simple and a very useful stitch to learn. The next one I want to show you guys is the woven circle. So for the woven circle, it looks pink. So I'm going to grab my pink right here in 308. Again, nothing too long, nothing too short, especially because the woven circle does consume a little bit more thread because this is all just weaving. You're actually not doing a lot of stitching. The nice thing about the rinse away design sheet is, like I mentioned earlier, since it doesn't stay on your fabric or anything, it just all washes away. Even if you're not the most precise with stitching right on where the stencil is, it'll all wash away. So no one will know if you're a little bit off, which is nice. And so even with my woven circle, since I'm starting kind of out here, I still added a little knot to my thread. And if you do add knots to your thread, especially when you're having to make a spoke or something like that, I like to start from the outside and go into the center. And the reason for that is because if you do have a knot, you don't really want it in the center because you're always going through the center more than one time. So I just estimate that my center is about here, and I'll go in. And since my knot is out here, when I come back to the center again, I don't have a knot that I'm going to have to try and dodge around, which is nice. And a trick that I have, and it's just for my own way of like measuring how to space out things like spokes when it's not marked out, is for 5 spokes, I'll kind of have a general idea of like where this circle would be split into quarters, right? You can kind of estimate what it'd look like if it was split into quarters. And because we're just taking a little bit less than that, since we need 5 spokes, I just go a little bit under the quarter mark, and that's where I'll put my next one. It doesn't need to be perfectly spaced for the woven circle, but it is helpful to have it as evenly spaced as you can. So again, from my last one, if this is like where I think about a quarter is from my last stitch, I'll just take a little bit less and then I'll come in. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, for my last one, this might look similar to a quarter. And then I'll just go in a little bit short of that. Go back to my center. And then when I'm on my last spoke, I just try to go right in between, right in the middle of the last 2. Like so. And so although it's not 100% perfectly spaced apart, it's pretty close, I would say. So that helps just, space everything out without having to actually draw on it. But of course, you can also draw on this if you want to. If it's already applied to your fabric, maybe consider using like a friction pen or something that might heat away or wash away instead of like a regular pen, just so it doesn't transfer through. Okay, so now that you have your 5 spokes, the next step you want to take is you want to just actually bring your needle up next to the center. And it doesn't matter which side you come from. You just want to come up right next to the center of your wheel. And from here on out, it's really simple. You're just going to be weaving over and under. So I like to go over the first one, then I go under the second, over, under, And you just keep going in a circle and building your woven circle until you get something that looks like a flower. I will note as well, you do want to use the back of your needle when you're doing this, just so you don't accidentally stab your spokes. Because if you do, then your thread will be stuck in that spot and you won't be able to like maneuver it down closer to the center. And this one's a fun one to do because I think it looks harder than it actually is. You're just kind of weaving back and forth, making sure you're not pulling too tight. Otherwise, your center may be off or your tension will be different in different parts of your woven circle. So whatever your tension is, just try to keep it consistent as you go around. And today I have Bethany again behind the camera helping me. So if you guys have any questions, you can write it in the comment section. She can read it right away and respond to you, or she can let me know and I can also respond. If there's anything that you guys think would be helpful for adjusting like the camera angle or anything like that, we can certainly make some adjustments too, because we're always trying to make this a better experience for you guys to learn how to do handwork. I know it's a bit intricate, so it's always a little bit easier to learn in person when someone's right next to you, teaching you exactly where the needle needs to go. But we want to optimize our camera setup so it's easy for you guys to see as well. So especially now that I'm getting close to the outside of the woven circle, I just want to watch my tension. I'm definitely not pulling tight at all, because if you do pull really tight, your thread will just end up buried underneath your woven circle. You just want to keep adding volume to the sides. All right, I think we're getting close here. I think I'm just going to go one more circle. So you know you're close to done when it's getting a little bit challenging to see where your 5 spokes are. So if I see them, I'll go maybe another round. But if it's starting to get hidden, then I think it's a good time to stop. And so as you can see here, you can still see a bit of the outline from the rinse away design sheet, that little shadow right there. That'll all go away, so you don't have to worry about that. And how I like to end my woven circle is I just I don't know if you can tell, but there's actually one spoke that goes right here. And I just went under that. So I'll go over the next one and just bury my needle. Kind of I go in it on a diagonal and then I'll just pull my needle through, keep my thread under there, and there you go. Really super simple, and that's the woven circle. Again, I'm just going to add a little knot back here. Oops, there we go. There we go. I'm gonna trim this shorter. There we go. Okay. Okay, so now we've done our woven circle. Next, what I have is a little bit of a simple one. If those ones were a little bit more complex, but all of these, again, like I said, are very beginner friendly. They just take a little bit of practice, but I'm gonna go into French knots. So French knots are actually kind of elusive, even though they're a very common stitch. Um, People can struggle with French knots a little bit, and because there is a way to wrap it on so that you don't undo your French knot, and there's kind of some tips that I have to keep it a little bit more consistent because, again, French knots can look different from knot to knot. So, I'm going to be using yellow for the center of my flowers. So I'm just gonna take a little length of it. This is the color 202. So this is definitely when you want to be using that milliner's needle because you will be wrapping the thread around the needle before you pull it through, and that will just be a lot nicer on your hands. Okay, so I got my thread. When I do the center of the flowers, I'm a little bit OCD with it, so I try to keep it as even as I can. It may not be perfect, but I try my best. So I just put my needle and pulled it up through the center of the flower. This will just be my first French knot, which will be in the middle, and then all the other French knots will go around the outside of it. And again, because I'm right-handed, this is how I do it. If you are left-handed, I think there might be an option to like mirror the video, or if you watch the video maybe from the other side, it'll help you kind of get a better idea of where you want to hold the thread. But essentially, I utilize my left hand pretty heavily in this technique. What I do is I kind of pull it out like parallel or kind of sideways like this, and I'll have my needle parallel to it above where my thread is. So hopefully you guys can see that all right. And then I'll wrap twice like this, over top, and my needle is pointing at my hand. And then I'll put the needle back in next to where I came up. So I'm not putting it through the same hole. And this is also another crucial part is you want to keep, you see how these are kind of loose on here? I'll pull it to the side. You can see how it's a little bit loose. You want to just use your left hand and pull it a little bit more taut. It doesn't have to be tight, but just so you don't have the loose threads on the needle. It'll just give you a cleaner finish. There you go. There's your first French knot. So I'm just going to come up to get ready to do my second one. Hold this with my left hand, needle in this position. We're going to wrap 1, 2. Push it back down next to where it came up. And I generally wrap my French knots twice, but you can wrap it 3 times. You can wrap it 1 time. All it really affects is the size of your French knot. 1, 2. So in this case, it is a bit more convenient to have a hoop when you're doing French knots. If you aren't using a hoop, another trick I like to have is I'll put a pin cushion um, underneath my work so that when I get to this stage, let me just show you. So I'll wrap it like this. When I get to this stage, I will stab it through my fabric, and then the needle will also go into the pin cushion, and that just helps stabilize everything while I make this hand a little bit more taut on the thread, and then I can pull the needle through like this. And French knots are not always consistent, so as you can see here, that one got a little bit more ovally. But isn't that the essence of handwork? No matter how perfect you try to make it, sometimes it'll just look like handwork. And that's totally fine because it'll look really nice at the end regardless. Another option you can consider, in addition to a French knot, is something called a colonial knot. So if you know how to do French knot already, and maybe you want to up your game a little bit, and you want to try something called a colonial knot, this one is more likely to have a consistent look, knot over knot, because you're wrapping the thread in 2 different directions, so it kinda balances out, whereas the French knot, you're wrapping it twice in the same direction, so, there might be differences in how the thread overlaps. So, for the colonial knot, you want to be holding the thread kind of in this downward position. With the needle, you want to actually be on the opposite side of the thread, go under, like so, and then you're gonna wrap it over. And again, put it back next to where you came up. And they're quite hard to tell apart, but the keen eye may be able to see it. I think I have room for 2 more. So I'll do one more colonial knot and I'll do one more French knot. So this is the colonial knot again. I have it in this downward position. My needle is on the opposite side here. I go under, and I use my left hand, bring the thread over, and then I stab it back into my work, like so. There we go. And then for my last one here, I'm just going to do a French knot. There we go. Left hand holding it sideways, needle on top. 1, 2. No, poke it back in. Ta-da! There we go. And now we got the center of our second flower. And I would just repeat that for this flower over here, and also all these little buds, or like they kind of look like baby breaths, but purple. And you can just do French knots or colonial knots here as well. So they're kind of sprinkled a little bit everywhere, but that's the glorious thing about French knots, is really you can just put them anywhere and it'll look pretty. Okay, so here we go again. So this one, since I have a bit more thread underneath, I'm not going to tie a knot. I'm just going to pull the thread once through, and maybe I'll just do it one more time, kind of like a loop. All right. That feels good. And I secure it like so. All right. And let's see what we have next. We have the fishbone stitch. So this one's a little bit I wouldn't say complicated, but it would definitely benefit from you measuring it out. The other ones can be more free form in my opinion, but if you do want to add leaves or this kind of fishbone stitch anywhere else, I do think it's helpful to sometimes draw an outline of something or have an idea of how you want your leaf shape to be, whether that's pretty uniform all the way or if you want it to be more wide at the bottom and thin at the top. But the fishbone stitch is very versatile. So I'm taking Dazzle for this. I have it in my Wonder Guard. I just pull out a length that I think I'll need. Put it up there. For rayon thread specifically, I do suggest tying a knot. Cotton, you can kind of get away with not doing it and just like running it through a few stitches underneath. But for the rayon threads, like I said, since it's slippery, you just want to make sure everything's nice and secure. So there's my little knot right here. Feels nice and tight. And here's Dazzle. Again, hopefully you guys can see the metallic thread right there. Yeah, it's an awesome thread. So we're going to do the leaf right here. How we start is at the tip of the leaf. We're going to bring our needle up like so. And then you're going to go a little bit forward and just like straight down in the center as well. So essentially it's just one single straight stitch like that. You can already see a bit of the metallic coming through, which is really fun. So the next step that you want to take is it doesn't matter if you're starting on the left or you're starting on the right, but essentially you're going to be taking your next stitch next to and a little bit down from where your first stitch is. So I'm coming up right here. So if my first stitch is here, my second stitch starts a little bit lower right there. Is that easy to see? Okay, just double checking with Bethany so you guys can see too. Now, where you want to put it next is not in the center, but actually a little bit offside, off to the other side on the opposite end. So let me just make sure. There we go. Like that. So it kind of will create this crisscross pattern. And then you come back on the other side and you try to make it a little bit level with where your first stitch was. You're going to cross over, kind of make that X, and not on the center line, just a little bit over, but not dramatically over, just a little bit over is enough. And then, yeah, you just go back and forth following the outline of your leaf all the way down the length of the leaf as well. So for this stitch, I typically like using a chenille needle, but of course you can use a milliner's. That's what I'm using right now. And there's not any issue wrong with that either, so. So you can kind of see the pattern starting to form this kind of cross hatch looking pattern. Just following the shape of the leaf here. Here we are, bringing it back over. And now that we're at the wider part of the leaf, it's probably a little bit easier to see than the start of the leaf. So I'm just gonna bring it out. Oh, sorry. My head comes in every now and then because I'm trying to get a closer look at where my needle's coming from. All right, so we're just pulling it up, bringing it across the middle line over here. And doing the same thing on the opposite side. And sometimes you can kind of measure out where you want it to land. I really love Dazzle. I think even using the even using Dazzle on the flowers would look really nice. If any of you have Dazzle at home. The colors that are printed on here are just a suggestion, so I strongly encourage you guys to use what you have and experiment with the different colors of eleganza. And if you guys do finish this, definitely tag us on our social media so we can share your beautiful work. We love seeing what people make because even myself, I find that I can kind of experiment with the confines of, oh, the stem is green, therefore I'll make a green stem. But, you know, when we've done these make and takes at the show, it's been really eye-opening to see all the creative ideas people have and different color combinations as well. So now that we're getting to the base of the leaf now, you don't want to be showing any of that like crisscross, kind of that crisscross that was happening in the middle. So you just, instead of pulling my last thread all the way over to the other side, I'll start aiming it for more of the center. Just enough so it can cover my last stitch that came from the other side. And there you go. This is the fishbone stitch. And you can see how nicely it looks. It looks all weaved together and stuff. This one is a little bit looser and this one's a little bit tighter, but that's, I think, just based on personal preference and how you want it to look. And, at first, it took me actually quite a long time to learn how to do this stitch because I thought it was difficult, but it's really not. And as you can see here, the back is really nice and neat. So again, I know I say it a lot, but really, it's not a hard stitch. You just need to give it a try. I'm not going to tie a knot here either. I'm just going to go through a few threads that are under there. Okay. And when you're snipping rayon, I would leave a little bit of a longer tail just so it doesn't slide out or anything like that. All right, so we've learned the lazy daisy, we've learned woven circle, French knots, the fishbone stitch, and we only have a few more stitches that we need that I'm going to cover, and I think they're pretty straightforward. I'm going to do one more on the hoop, and the last two I actually am going to do off the hoop because that's my preference, and I actually think it's easier for people to learn off the hoop for the last two. So this one is a lot of times I think within the top 3 stitches people learn when they start hand embroidery. I've switched over to the brown color of Razzle. So look how nice and shiny that is. So I'm going to teach you how to do the back stitch. All right, just threading my needle. All right, I have my needle threaded and I'm just going to add a little knot at the back. All right, so I'm going to be using this color brown on this kind of branch right here. So as the name suggests, it kind of feels like you're stitching backwards when you do this back stitch. So even if my line starts here, I'm actually going to come up 1 stitch length away. Right there. Pull it up, and then you're actually going to go back 1, like so. Oops. Like this. Then your next one is going to be, again, a stitch length away, and then you go back to where your first one started. So this is where the name comes from. You're going kind of forward, backward, forward, backward. So we got our stitch forward, and then we do our back stitch. There are guidelines of like stitch length printed onto the rinse away design sheet for this flower bouquet, but you can always adjust whatever stitch length you think looks the nicest as well. I think what it comes down to is, when I talk to people, I know people want to do it right and they want to do it good the first time, but honestly, a lot of it's personal preference. Even needles is a lot of times personal preference too, because as you can see, I've actually been using one needle throughout this process, just to make things a little bit faster for on camera. But you can switch it around, you can keep it similar. Another thing too is, not everyone has the same level of dexterity or hand strength, or sometimes people simply need a larger eye so they know that they can thread the needle. So I always say that handwork especially is supposed to be a relaxing thing. I think that's where the term slow stitching comes from. So I would do what makes you comfortable, because that's what you're going to end up doing is when you're enjoying the process, because it's comfortable for your hands, for your body, for your mind, everything in between. I know that's kind of corny, but in all honesty, I even do a lot of handwork with my own mom sometimes, and her thumb can get sore from handwork because it is a lot of pushing and pulling. Um, so using sometimes a larger eye or using a larger needle helps, or things like that. There's absolutely no shame in that whatsoever. So now we're pretty much close to this flower here. And I'm just going to add one more so it looks like it's kind of hiding behind there. And then later on, I'm just probably going to grab a shorter piece of this brown rayon thread and go in and do all these little branch details. But that is the back stitch, and it's very straightforward, very practical as well. So there it is. And here we are in the back. Just going to run it through like so. And maybe one more time. I'm always a little extra cautious because I know our samples go on the road. They're maybe a little bit more roughed around than your average hand embroidery project. All right. So there's our back stitch. Hopefully you guys can see the shininess of the dazzle and the razzle, because it's really evident in person. So I hope it translates through the camera. But the last two that I want to show you are the stem stitch and the bullion knot. And those ones are a little bit easier, I find, to do off the hoop. So I'm just going to take my piece of fabric here, take it off the hoop, and show you how to proceed. All right. And I've just cut a larger rectangular piece because I think we're going to make this into a little bag later or something like that. All right. I'm going to use the variegated thread because I really like using variegated threads. This is the purple one, Easy M1001. And that is the same purple or similar purple that was used in my other flower bouquet as well. Right. Okay, so starting with the stem stitch, this is kind of like the cousin of the back stitch. And I'm going to be working from left to right, not right to left. So if we imagine, I'm just choosing kind of a random position, but let's imagine that there's a line right there. And that's where I'm going to show you how to do the stem stitch. So I come up, and my first stitch is generally a little bit larger, like so. And I'll bring it a little bit closer to where I started. So it's a little bite like this. And that's why it's a little bit harder to do it on the hoop, is whenever you're doing kind of those little bite-sized stitches. All right, so that's your first one. And what you're going to do is you're going to hold down this thread like that, and you're going to take your next stitch forward. And for your second stitch, you're actually going to come back exactly where your last stitch ended. So it's going to kind of look continuous. And it's also another little bite. Pull your needle through, and then you hold the thread down like so. Another bite forward, come back up where your last stitch ended, pull it through, and then you're going to hold it down again. And you guys probably start to understand the pattern now of the stem stitch. I'm going to continue going on, hold it down, a little bite forward, hold it down. And so as you go on, stem stitch is one of my favorites because if you're not super precise with a back stitch, sometimes it can look a little jaggedy, but with the stem stitch, I find it's really nice to make soft curved lines really beautifully. So as we move into the light color variegated, maybe you guys can see it a little bit better. Just going to do a few more. Small stitch forward, come back where your last stitch ended. The key point is you're always holding it down, and I like to hold it down with my thumb, because if you're not holding it down, or if you're only holding it down part of the time, you don't get the illusion of that twisted look. So hopefully this is in focus. Bethany, can you see this okay?
Mm-hmm.
Looks twisted. So I'll grab another example of one that I've done in a little bit of a longer length to show you. It kind of creates this rope-like texture where it looks like the thread is actually twisting and twisting and twisting, and the body of the stitch is actually more elevated than a simple back stitch. So it's actually a little bit heavier looking, but yeah, it's gorgeous, and it feels round when you run over it with your thumb because of the fact that it's more elevated. So again, I'll just do a few more to show you guys. So hold it down, little stitch, come back where your last one ended, right there. Pull your needle through. Oops. And then you start getting this overlapped kind of look. And I'm going to tilt it around because I think the shadow might show the fact that it's a little elevated. Here, let me just like this. You can see there. And it looks nice and twisted as well. So that's the stem stitch. Really similar to the back stitch, but instead of doing like a whole stitch length, you're kind of doing these like half stitch lengths, I like to say. So to end off, instead of just taking the little bite, I'll go closer to where my last one here ended. I'll just maybe go a little bit forward, poke the needle through like this, and then I'll just bury it in the back or tie it off. So since I'm going to actually probably be cutting this out later, so it's not just like a random line on my bag, I'm just going to put it under one stitch and clip it off because I'll pick it out later. All right, so that's the stem stitch for you right there. And last but not least, we're going to go over the bullion knot. The bullion knot, it kind of looks like a caterpillar. It's a raised stitch. It's a little bit elevated, and actually it's what's giving the illusion of this rope. I can actually put my needle underneath and lift it because it is kind of like this U shape. And the idea of it is you're just wrapping the threads around the needle, or yeah, you're wrapping your thread around your needle a bunch of times, pulling your needle through, and what you're left is with this kind of rope-like look. And there's tons of things you can do with the bullion. In this case, it's gonna be like more of this long shape, but you can also make it like a bullion butterfly or a bullion ladybug, or you can always choose the distance of your bullion knot. So I'll start off to show you guys the basis and potentially do a second one to show you what I mean by some variety in your bullion knot. So first and foremost, I'm just going to come up, go the length that I want the bullion knot to be. So not too far away, maybe a little bit further, like so. And you're actually going to come back up next to where your thread came up there. So you just have like definitely larger than a bite, but like a little stitch like this. And you don't want to pull your needle through. So this is how you're going to start wrapping your thread, is you have your needle in and out, and then you have your working thread just kind of around there. Then what I find a little bit easier is I'll hold my fabric and my needle like this. Here's the back. This is my grip. So I have my pointer finger holding the back of the needle, my thumb holding the front of the needle, and I'll just use my left hand and start wrapping. So let's just count to maybe like 8 first and see where we're at. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And so that looks almost the same length as my stitch, and I want a more round shape. So I'm gonna keep adding more wraps. Let's add like 6 more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so now I know for sure it's gonna be a pretty bubbly bullion knot. And you do want to make sure these are taut, not too tight. And this is, I wouldn't say a mistake or anything, but this is something I see a lot of beginner hand stitchers encounter is when it's too tight, it's very difficult to pull your needle through all these wraps. So you just want it to make sure that they look consistent, they're not too tight and they're not too loose. You can adjust this slightly by pinching it with your finger and your thumb, just like twisting it in either direction to either loosen it like this. You can see right there, it's a little bit looser, or you can twist it the other way and then it'll be a little bit tighter. So in this case, I'm just going to loosen it up a little bit so I can pull the needle through. I pinch it, and then either with a thimble or if your thumb is okay, you can push the blunt end of your needle through your fabric and pull it through. And take note that I'm still pinching my wraps. I'm not letting go yet until I pretty much have to. So now this is what it'll look like. And you just kind of have to keep pulling the thread and playing with it a little bit until you have your bullion knot. So you can see right there, kind of has this like wormy look to it. And before your stitch is done, you just gotta poke the needle back through to the other end, and that's your bullion knot. So from the front view, it just kind of looks like this rope kind of texture. But if I turn it sideways, here we go. Hopefully you guys can see that. You can actually see that it's like elevated off the fabric. And that's the fun thing about the bullion knot is because it's really only touching 2 spots. And so the more wraps that you add, the higher it's going to come off the fabric. The fewer wraps that you add, the closer to the fabric it'll be. But I've made like flowers and stuff with bullion knots before too, so I'll just do another quick example before we wrap up here. I know I've taken like an hour of your guys' time, so I really appreciate those of you who stuck around. So if I'm doing kind of like a flower petal, previously we went kind of like this distance away. But if I want kind of a loop, you just go a shorter distance. So I'm gonna really take a small bite this time, like this. And the same idea, don't pull your needle all the way through. I'm holding my fabric and the needle. And I just start wrapping. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Okay. I just wanted to get a little bit of variegated color in there to show you guys. So again, I play with how tight it's going to be just so it's a little bit easier to pull through. Pinch it with my finger and my thumb. Push the needle through. And again, I find it a little bit easier to put it on like a table or something as you're kind of working how you're pulling this through, like so. All right. So now that we're near here, I just poke the needle back underneath. And then you get a little loop like this. Here, I'll turn it again so you guys can see how it's elevated off the fabric like this. So you can do a bunch of fun things with the bullion knot. Not just like a rope like this, but you can make them short, you can make them long. But essentially, that is all that you need to know for this. I know we ran through quite a number of stitches today, but again, the more that you practice, the easier it'll come to you while you're stitching along. And a lot of these stitches as well can be applicable in different areas, not just limited to like a flower bouquet like this. Several of these can be used for outlining as well. Once you learn the lazy daisy, you're pretty much three-quarters of the way there in learning like a chain stitch. So um, I'm just going to switch the camera so you guys can see me again. Okay, so again, thank you for sitting me through that as I went through all the stitches. I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We learned 7 stitches today, which is actually a lot. So definitely don't feel obligated to get this all done in one session. This will even though it's small, this will probably take you more than an hour. So just take your time. It's summer now, so you can sit on your porch or deck or take it on the plane with you and do a little bit of handwork. But I hope you can refer back to this video to help guide you through some of these simple stitches. And thank you again so much. This little kit here, again, is called the Hand Embroidery Essentials Kit. And it has everything that you need in there and a bunch of fun threads. And if you already have more eleganza colors at home, of course, add more flowers to your bouquet and really fluff it up. We'd love to see it on social media too if you guys do finish. But thank you for sticking around. I hope you enjoyed today's session of Stitching with Stephanie, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye.